Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast for Thursday, February the 20th. I'm Zach Ewing with advocate columnist Scott Rabalais and our LSU football beat writer, Wilson Alexander. We are talking a little college football playoff and possible expansion today. The SEC and the Big Ten conferences met in New Orleans this week. Scott, you were there, and it looks like there is movement on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean they declined to get into a lot of specifics, but the expectation and one of the athletic directors even mentioned this leaving the meeting yesterday to reporters that everyone expects there's going to be expansion as soon as the 2026 season, and the SEC and the Big Ten want it to be what they want it to be. This expansion with what everyone expects will be a guaranteed number of automatic bids for each conference, probably 4. So that's 14 to 16 teams, maybe half the field, and then they did say they want to do away with the automatic buys for the top 4 conference champions, which is expected to meet with some resistance this week, next week when they meet with everyone in Dallas. But yeah, they're laying out the future of what they want it to be, and they're the power brokers, and we'll see how much power they can wield going forward with the rest of the conferences and Notre Dame, but I think it's probably considerable.
Yeah, we'll talk about how much weight these two behemoth conferences are going to throw around and exactly what they want as we go through the show. But Wilson, we could kind of see this coming when the top 4 seeds that got the buys all lost their college football playoff games, and everyone was kind of upset that we had Oregon and Ohio State, maybe the 2 best teams in the country, playing in the quarterfinals. And it just sort of, the first year of the expanded college football playoff was fun, but it was also messy, and it was always on this 2-year kind of window. Like, changes were always coming.
Changes were certainly coming. I mean, we wrote about this back at the national championship game in January about the seeding. That was the top sort of topic at the time, and there wasn't expected to be anything that changed when there was a meeting there right before the championship game, but that was sort of the main thing on the table was, are they going to change the seeding in some respects? Because the seeding was, well, it's very confusing to keep up with, I think, as a fan. But it also, Boise State and Arizona State got buys. The SEC and the Big Ten probably aren't going to be super jazzed about that, right? Like some of these power conferences that, Arizona State, which finished 12th, and Boise State, which is the G5 champ, like, I think is great. Like, it's pretty cool that they got buys. Like, I don't know that that's 1 year of this should dictate what happens in the future, that should dictate expansion. We have such little data, but that was always the topic, was sort of like, okay, is there a way to sort of tweak the seating for this to be a little bit different in some respects? So that change was potentially the only one that we'll get for 2025. But yeah, in 2026, because the CFP contract ends, and then there's a reported memorandum of agreement that gives the Big Ten and the SEC a ton of power starting in 2026. You don't have to have a unanimous vote like you do right now for 2025. Then, that's probably when we could see quite a lot of change happen to the college football playoff. And then as a result, a lot of other things that could change around college football.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, so let's talk just kind of the gist of what these conferences want. And again, Scott, you said they're not commenting on this publicly. This isn't confirmed info, but by our reporting and by reporting of former advocate writer Ross Dellinger, who works for Sports Illustrated and
Yahoo.
I'm for Yahoo. He works for Yahoo now. I can't keep up with Ross. He's on the move too much. But reporting by a lot of different sources, let's say, what the SEC and Big Ten would like is, number one, to seed according to the ranking. So to your point, Wilson, you get rid of the ESPN graphic where they say, well, Georgia's the number 3 team, but they're the number 5 seed, and Boise State's the number 11 team, but they're the number 3 seed, and everybody's kind of going, what is going on? So you would get rid of that. You would just seed based on pure ranking, which helps the SEC and Big Ten because they probably are going to have more of the top 4 teams more often. And then the other change they want is to expand this thing to either 14 or 16 teams, and they would like reportedly as many as 4 automatic bids from their conference. So the top 4 teams from each conference would get in from the SEC and the Big Ten. Then maybe the top 2 from the Big 12 and the ACC. Then you have an at-large. Then you have a group of 5, and then you have room for a couple of at-larges. So that's sort of the proposal on the table. Do I have that right, Rab?
Yeah, Notre Dame would get in if they're ranked high enough, say maybe in the top 14. But yeah, that's the gist, that these big conferences would get you get at least 4 teams in. And to your point, I'll say real quick, Zach, this year the top 4 in the straight seedings were number 1 Oregon, the Big Ten champion, number 2 Georgia, the SEC champion, number 3 Texas, the SEC runner-up, and number 4 Penn State, the Big Ten runner-up. So those would have been the top 4 seeds under what the SEC and the Big Ten would like to see. Instead, you had this jumble, and it was confusing. Not as confusing as say NQS in rankings and gymnastics, but it was confusing to the fans. But I don't think that it's out of this altruistic notion of we want to help the fans understand that the SEC and Big Ten, they want their schools they want to make sure they get as many schools in as they can, and that they're seated high enough that they can advance very far. So that's where the motivation is to me.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about whether we like this change personally later, a little bit later, Wilson. But like, you can see why the SEC and Big Ten would want this. Now, there are some complications. Like, it seriously lessens the import of a conference championship game. If your top 4 teams are already getting in, why do these teams even want to play a conference championship game? So they're talking about changing that format. It also lessens the importance of some of the regular season games, like LSU Alabama last year. Maybe that's a bad example because those teams could have been fighting for top 4. But there are some other games where you just sort of go, okay, 5 years ago, this would have been an enormous game. Now it's not so much because the winner and loser are both safely in that top 4 anyway, and they're really just playing for seeding.
The college football playoff expanding to 12 teams already lessened the importance of some of the mammoth regular season games that we had in the past. This past season was still a chaotic season and chaotically interesting and fun. But some of those mammoth games in the regular season didn't hold the same kind of weight that they used to. I mean, Ohio State losing to Michigan didn't knock Ohio State out of playoff contention like it used to. And further expansion would continue to devalue the regular season. Now, like you said, there's the proposal that's being circulated is that they might reimagine conference championship weekend to where you would almost have like a play-in bracket type of thing to determine the top 4 teams in your league, which I find interesting because why not just sort of do it? All these teams have gotten rid of, conferences have gotten rid of divisions. Like, why not just take your top 4 as they are according to the standings? I could see where that could be some complications of that, though, because of tiebreakers. Like, we had a massive tie and a group of teams that's sitting at 5 and 3 in the SEC. They might say, well, we want to play this out on the field. Well, you already did. And whoever is in 3rd or 4th or whatever, based on those tiebreakers, like that should be what I think you agree upon. I don't see why they're doing the conference championship game reimagined weekend because of money, TV money. And because the conference championship games won't matter as much, so come up with something else to put that weekend and make more money. And that's just what the whole thing sort of feels like, is kind of a money grab. But well, to your point about the regular season, again, it just, in one respect, you could say, well, it sort of still makes the regular season important because you're now really focused on your conference race, which is a little bit more true to college football in some respects, more traditional college football, that you're focused on the conference race potentially. But does a team like 5 and 3 Alabama in the SEC or 5 and 3 LSU in the SEC really deserve a chance to get a way into the playoff in the back door at the end of the year? Like, that's what doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't think anybody, we cover LSU every day here, but I don't think that probably people who are watching and listening to this are mostly LSU fans, but I don't think that any of them would agree that LSU last year deserved a way to get into the college football playoff at the very end after finishing 8 and 4 in the regular season. Like, you did what you did on the field, and it wasn't good enough. And so I don't understand why we're sort of opening the door to teams like that. Like, Iowa would have competed for a spot in the Big Ten as in that sort of scenario in which there's these play-in games. And again, like, Iowa, like, they shouldn't be in college football playoff contention last year. They weren't good enough. It doesn't make sense to me.
That opens up a great possibility that, say, you guarantee 4 SEC teams get in, and as Wilson said, there's just this carnage, right? There's a bunch of teams. Like, you have one team that finishes 11-1, and you have one and with one loss in the conference, and 2 teams finish 10-2. Okay, but then there's a bunch of 9-3, 8-4 teams that lost 3 or 4 games, and but they're guaranteed one of those teams is getting a spot in the playoff, and maybe it's not that deserving. Maybe they lost their non-conference game to and then they lost 3 games in conference. So I don't know. I wish they would not be forging ahead so rapidly without looking at how this current form of the playoff worked more than 1 year, but that's apparently not the case.
Yeah, the SEC standings this past year, you would have had Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, South Carolina, and Texas A&M all knotted up at 5 and 3, fighting for the 4th spot, and that just feels more chaotic. I don't think that you're solving anything. It's like, what problem are you trying to solve here if I do this? I don't feel like there is one.
Yeah, college sports and college football in particular seem very reactive to me. The bowl alliance got changed the 1 year that it didn't work right, and somebody got pissed off and left out. The BCS it stopped and it got changed when somebody else got left out and pissed off. And and now so we have this year of the college football playoff, and maybe the SEC and Big Ten were going to do this anyway, but you have this kind of chaotic first year where Arizona State and Boise State got byes and the top 4 teams all lost in the quarterfinals. And it was like, oh my God, we have to do something. You don't have to do something. It's not always better just to change it. We're seeing it in college basketball right now. They want to expand the tournament. There's teams out there right now that are, if you look at bracketology, that are in the field at like 15-10. Now we're letting teams even worse than that in the field. Why do we need to do that? So maybe I'm tipping my hat as to which way I lean on this, but I do. The other point I guess I would make is on the auto bids. The SEC and Big Ten want 4 each. Well, if you expand the playoff, Scott, to 14 or even 16 teams, especially, the top 4 in the SEC and Big Ten are almost always going to get in anyway. Like they're almost always going to be 4 SEC and 4 Big Ten teams within the top 16 of the standings. So it really just seems like a power play to me for them to say, this is what we're going to do. The other aspect of this, of course, is that the SEC and Big Ten are talking about adding a non-conference game agreement against each other where they would play each other. Okay. And so maybe it's some protection against that. The team that loses that game still has a pathway to get in. But then to me, that makes that game kind of pointless. Why are you playing it if it doesn't mean anything?
It's definitely a power play. I mean, it's definitely like just to try to sum up a large issue very, very quickly. The NCAA, which was this authoritarian organization for so many years, has abdicated a lot of the control over college sports. Not that it had a lot of control over college football to begin with. Obviously, this is not to determine the NCAA Division I champion. This is to determine the champion of the college football playoff that these conferences and Notre Dame have built. But it's going to extend to other things. These big conferences said we don't want to be judged or governed along with the Mid-American Conference and the Big Sky Conference and stuff like that. We want to be judged on our own merit. So they're trying to step in and fill the void of the power structure in college athletics and say this is what we want. And this year they can't. This year, for this coming playoff, they have to get unanimous consent from all the conferences and Notre Dame to make any changes, like going to the automatic bids, doing away with the automatic bids. But starting next year, as Wilson mentioned, there's supposedly a memorandum of agreement which says that they can lead the charge on this. They have to consult with these other conferences in Notre Dame, but they don't have to listen to them. It's kind of like Zach, say your family's trying to decide where you go on vacation, and you say, we're going to listen to you have 3 kids, right? You can listen to all 3 kids. And one says, I want to go on a Disney cruise. The other one says, I want to go to the beach. And the other one says, I want to go to New York City and go see some plays and museums. And you say,
it's Branson again, kids.
I've heard you, and we're going to the mountains. I heard what you had to say, but this is what we're going to do. So that's the way they want it to be. And is that good or bad for college athletics? It depends on your perspective, obviously.
Okay, so Rab was our boots on the ground reporter yesterday. So we're going to do a little role reversal here where I'm going to be the columnist. It's greed. That's all it is. It's greed. I mean, so the fourth, the SEC in most years, like it took chaos, like carnage, like we had not seen really since 2007 for Alabama to get left out of the playoff last year, for the SEC not to have 4 teams anyway. The Big Ten had 4 teams anyway with Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana, and they would tell you that, oh, well, this is sort of a reaction to conference realignment and these teams teams, these conferences being more bloated. You did that yourself. And so now you're trying to rig the system in your favor. And so, Ross put out a chart where kind of looking back at, I think, the past, the 11 years of playoff data that we have, like how many on general teams from those leagues would have made it. And like on average, you'd have like 4 SEC and 4 Big Ten teams make it. Like it's usually going to work out in your favor anyway. If you were to expand to 14, there probably would even be years where you might get 5 in. Say Notre Dame takes a step back. They're not in the top 14. Like that at-large bid could go to somebody in the SEC or the Big Ten. Again, like that, it's going to set up in your favor anyway. It took a crazy year, and is that crazy year going to be the norm moving forward? We'll have to see. But like, even if it is, like, I don't see why that's a bad thing. So, and you alienate parts of the country if you're going into the year, you're just like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have 4 spots automatically, no matter what. Like, there should be a feeling at the start of a season that anybody can get in, and it sort of takes away from that. And so I don't understand the automatic, qualifiers to have that set like that, because it just feels like it takes away from so many possibilities that you would have in college sports. And I'm reminded of what Bill Hancock, the former executive director of the CFP, told me at the national championship game, which was, I've heard talk about more, and I don't know why. Can the next group of teams, the next 4, actually win the championship? Can any of those 4? I'll leave you with that as a question. Does anyone think they can actually win the championship? And no, I don't think that they can. There might be, we play this out 100 times, and there could be the team that comes in at 14 that at least like wins a game or maybe makes a little bit of a run. But it would be shocking if they ever actually won the championship. And so it's like, what's the point of all this? It's greed. It's greed. That's what the point is. It's greed. It's looking for more money, and it's trying to set their own conferences up for success in the future. And that's all it is to me.
I don't disagree with anything Wilson's saying. I will provide the counterpoint, though, from the SEC and the Big Ten's perspective. Aren't they supposed to be looking out for their best interests? If they don't, who will? So they're trying to, it's a competitive world, it's a competitive sport, and they're trying to set their conferences up to be in the best position they can to get the most teams in the playoff, to get to have the best chance to win the national championship. Now, they should be looking out for the best interests of college sports and college football overall. And Greg Sankey said something to that effect, like, we have to do this wisely. I'm trying to find his exact quote. Decisions were made by everyone, not dictated by us. But that does seem a little disingenuous. They are trying to dictate terms to everyone else. And look, I go back to what Mike Martin, the former LSU president, once said 15 years ago. There's eventually going to be 2 conferences: the ESPN conference and the Fox conference, and that's the SEC and the Big Ten. And I think we're gravitating more and more that way. And if I was the Big 12 or the ACC or a fan of a school in one of those conferences, I would feel very threatened.
So a couple of things. I will say I agree with you, Wilson. It is greed. It is ridiculous. Part of the magic of college football is, your team's playing a Saturday game and you're ranked number 8 and you're sweating that game out, but you're also watching number 10 BYU play on a Thursday night and just living and dying with every play because a BYU loss might really help you out, or Washington or USC or whoever it is out west that plays on a Thursday or Friday night, and you're staying up till midnight watching this crazy game because it affects your team. And if you have these auto bids, that goes away. I mean, that takes away some of the magic to me. And I hate that. I will say, to your point about, okay, can the next 5 teams win a national championship? Like, the most popular tournament there is March Madness. And I would say the last 4 or 5 teams that get into March Madness have very little chance of actually winning it. I'm okay with including a couple more teams because their fan bases get to experience that sort of the magic of that tournament. And I think you could have the same thing in football, even if they don't actually dream of winning a national championship. Like Indiana this past year, and maybe that's a bad example because they had a very good season. I mean, they would have been in a lot of 18 playoffs and everything too. But just the fact that they got to experience that, even though they lost the first round, something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Were they ever going to win the national title? Probably not, but they did get to be in the dance. And then to your last point, Rab, and this is kind of where I want to go next, is if the SEC and Big Ten, who have this unilateral ability to force these changes through starting in 2026, if they decide that they don't like the answer they get from the ACC and the Big 12, is there a possibility the ACC and Big 12 tell them to go kick rocks and go start your own tournament if you don't want to include us, or if you want to have your cake and eat it too. We don't want to be a part of it. I mean, do you see that as a possibility?
It's going to be a risk.
Yeah, that's kind of the nuclear option, isn't it? I mean, according to some of the reporting I've seen, that's kind of the veiled threat of the SEC and the Big Ten, that they could start their own tournament. And obviously an ESPN or a Fox or whoever would want to follow along and say, yeah, we'll televise it, and we'll pump that up as the champion. So the SEC and the Big Ten should realize you can't have a legitimate championship without these other conferences. Those other conferences obviously have to have the SEC and the Big Ten. And I don't think they think it's fair, and I don't think they think that. I think they worry that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be equitable in terms of all this stuff. But obviously, these are 34 of the biggest programs in the country. The two biggest conferences, comprise all these teams, and the other guys just have to kind of play along. It's kind of like the U.S. and foreign policy. These other countries have to kind of play along because they're the big dog on the block. So, but yeah, it's like they've ruined a lot. I say ruined it. They've certainly changed so much about college football. And some people say, I don't care if Oklahoma and Oklahoma State don't play every year. Well, some people do, and that's part of the fabric of college sports. And you look at it now and you see these teams having to fly from one coast to the other to play a conference game in the Big Ten, or the ACC. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. The regionalism and the factionalism is going out of college sports, and I think they're making a lot of decisions too fast. And I think this is another example of that.
I like the way that you kind of put that, Rab. One, I agree with that all this is happening so fast. And it's like things that were the way they were for a very long time are all of a sudden changing. And now if we're going to expand to 14 or 16 in 2026, think about how many different ways the playoff would have looked in like a 5-year span. You would have gone from 4 to 12, and then from 14 or to 16. And then, okay, but we're going to change the auto bids. It's like, if you're a fan who is trying to keep up with this, I mean, we're living and breathing it, and so we can kind of keep up with it. But I think there's probably a lot of people who are legitimate, like high-level college football fans who can't even keep up with it because it's like snip, snap. You don't know what you're getting year after year. And so it's like, okay, we've gone through 1 year of the 12-team playoff with all the way the system was now. I feel like maybe a lot of people are finally starting to get it, like how this thing works, and be able to understand it going into next season. Okay, this is what we can expect going into next year, and then you're just going to change it again, and that's really hard to keep up with. And you're not going to alienate, I don't think, like a lot of your main fan base, your main college football fan base, but casual fans, you might alienate them a little bit. Although a lot of the reason they come anyway is just for the feeling of a Saturday in the fall, which is what I think the essence of college football is. And then I don't want that to get lost in some of all of this, which is the thing that makes the sport what it is those game days every day in the fall. It's not even necessarily the national championship race. It's become more of that over the past years, but I think traditionally it's more of I don't think that's really what the focus was, at least in my lifetime. I feel like it was a lot of that was part of it, but it wasn't the sole priority of it. A lot of it was just beating your rival on a Saturday in the fall, and we've lost some of that because those rivalry games and some of these other big games that we talked about earlier don't matter quite as much. They don't hold the same weight quite as much. I mean, obviously, if you're a Michigan fan, you're still giddy that you beat Ohio State. But if you're an Ohio State fan, which I have some friends who are, it's like, yeah, we lost, but we won the national title, and that's not what it really used to be as much, I don't think.
Okay, so I think we've all kind of tipped our hand on this a little bit, but I was going to end with whether you like this move personally. So I'll expand it a little bit. I don't think any of us necessarily are ready for it or like the idea of it, but I will expand it to this. Do you like it personally, and do you think it's a good thing for LSU?
I think it's a good thing for LSU. Yeah, that's another opportunity to make the playoff. If they were to go to the scenario in which there's automatic qualifiers, then LSU just has to finish top 4 in the conference. And like we were talking about, I would need to go through the numbers actually. Let's come back to that in another podcast. Maybe it's a story at some point this offseason, like how many times over the past 15 years or whatever, like LSU would have finished in the top 4 in the SEC and thus been in the college football playoff. Because this year, this past year, despite going 8-4 and people starting to get very antsy about the direction of the program under Brian Kelly, LSU finished 5th in the conference, like one spot out of being in the college football playoffs. So it's a good thing for LSU, I would think. I mean, the SEC is bigger, so the competition is stiff. But if you have more opportunities to get in, then like that's a good thing for a school that expects to be competitive every year. But I think that as for my own personal feelings, I feel like I've made those pretty clear. I'm not in favor of it. I just don't understand why it's happening. And I want them to, it's like, please come and explain this to me. Why do you think this is necessary? And we haven't gotten that yet from the leaders of the Big Ten and the SEC. They had a chance to do that yesterday. They didn't really explain it. And so at some point they need to come out here and explain, like, why do you think this is necessary? Really be clear with that, because it just doesn't feel like you're really solving anything and you're moving so fast with it. It doesn't make much sense to me.
I feel like if they honestly had to answer that question, they would just open up a briefcase of dollar bills and make it rain, because that's really the reason. I mean,
which if that's then be honest with it. Yeah, like I can accept that if you're going to be at least honest about it. Like, yeah, we just want more money. It's like, okay, well, at least all right, you told me that. That's thanks for at least being honest about it.
Yeah, I'll let you end, Rab. I'll just say my piece real quick. I don't like it for a couple of things I said. I think it completely it basically makes non-conference games an exhibition, right? They're just seeding games, because all that matters is where you finish in your conference in the SEC and Big Ten. I guess if there's at-large bids, maybe the 5th place team in one of those leagues could be playing for one of those, but it really lessens the impact of those. And I just, like I said before, I think there's a reactive element to this, and I think that there are problems. Like what happens, to Wilson's point, the first time we're going to have these modified championship games, which aren't championship games at all. They're play-in games between the 4th and the 5th place team in the league. What happens when you have a 4th place team that's 10-2, but lost a 3-way tie in the conference to finish 4th, and then a 5th place team that's 7-5 and went 4-4 in the league, but won a tiebreaker to finish 5th, and they go and beat them in this modified championship game, and now all of a sudden you've got a 8-5 team in the championship. Like, that's going to happen sooner or later if we play this out enough times. And I feel like then you're kind of back at square one. You're like, well, what do we do about this problem? And then we're going to change it again. And I sometimes I wish we would just leave it alone, like you said, Wilson, for a few years, and let's see what the real problems consistently are. Rab, we'll let you wrap up with your feelings on this.
Yeah, I think everyone's been motivated by fear in college athletics, the fear of being left out. I think it's why some of these schools have been willing to change conferences. And Stanford joins the ACC, or an Oregon joins the Big Ten. Their fear of being left out. We have to expand. We have to get bigger. We have to join the big boys, or we're going to be Oregon State. We're going to be Washington State. And I think we've seen some of that, and it's unfortunate because obviously we've lost some of the fabric of college football and college athletics. It seems to me the CFP was set up to fail from the beginning, in a sense. When they went with 4 teams and you had 5 power conferences, and you only had 4 teams, and you're like, well, someone's getting left out every year. Yeah, someone's going to eventually get upset about being left out. But I think maybe they could have tried going to 8 and see where that was. I think 8 teams is about as many teams as you need to say deserve a shot at the national championship in college football. It's not like basketball where LSU's women won as a 3 seed 2 years ago. No one batted an eye that a 3 seed won the national championship, but the 10 seed, that's the equivalent of being a 10 seed in football. Does that team really deserve, as Wilson said, you've proven on the field that you're not quite up to that level this year. Come back and try to do better next year. I always try to look for the whole picture of the silver lining. If there is a silver lining to all this, it's that the SEC, if it feels comfortable enough that it's going to get enough teams in the playoff, may finally vote to go to a 9-game schedule. And that came up a little bit yesterday. And of course, Greg Sankey was non-committal about that. But that appears to be something. And the SEC has been kind of split on this, as Wilson could also attest. Some schools want to stick with the 8-game schedule, which they've had even with the expansion of Texas and Oklahoma. And some schools want to go to 9. LSU wants to go to 9. Scott Woodward at LSU have been very vocal proponents of going to a 9-game schedule, which means one less rent-a-win on your schedule. And so I think if all this eventually happens, which it will lead to the SEC finally adopting a 9-game schedule, and perhaps you're creating this a series of non-conference games with the Big Ten, which is exciting. I mean, the idea of Michigan and LSU finally playing in football, which they never have, or Penn State coming to Tiger Stadium, or LSU going to Iowa even is exciting, and I think that could be a good thing. But generally, I certainly wish, as I think we all wish, they would have tapped the brakes on this and said, let's give it a 4-year cycle or something like that and see how it looks. Not doing that, they're forging ahead and making all these decisions that I think eventually some people are going to go, that was a mistake, but they're not thinking about that right now.
Scott, quick counterpoint to what Rab said. You could play 9 games anyway. You don't have to have the expanded playoff. You could choose to play 9 games anyway. They've been talking about it for years. You don't have
to. This is the motivation.
It doesn't have to hinge on the playoff.
No, it does not. It does not. But this is finally the motivation that could push them across that goal line.
But remember, Wilson, money.
Right.
And that's all that really matters here. Scott Rabalais, I appreciate you putting a little bit of a positive spin, because I feel like we've been pretty negative on this show. It's still college football. And to a certain extent, it is going to be like a what's old is new again, because this massive change, if it goes through and that we don't, we're all not ready for and things like that, if it brings around some SEC Big Ten rivalries or that 9th SEC game or both, you are going to get to see some more traditional Saturdays in the fall that maybe we've been missing the last couple of years. Like LSU might play Auburn more often, or they might get that long-awaited game against Michigan. There are some positives to this. It's still college football. We still love it. And so we appreciate you tuning in, and we're going to be with you all off season. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like button. We are going to wrap up. We're going to take a 30-second break and then wrap up with a quick LSU basketball segment. TJ Brown is here to talk about the men's basketball team, which is actually winning games, which is new. So what's old is new again. But Scott, Wilson, thank you guys for being here. We're going to sub you out for TJ after this break.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
All right, back on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. I'm Zach Ewing, now joined by Toyloy Brown III, better known to us as TJ. He is the men's basketball beat writer for The Advocate, the LSU men's basketball beat writer. He's been busy. He's got some Southern athletic stuff going on. You're going to be covering some spring football for us as well. Real quick, TJ, just to wrap up our discussion, do you have a take on a possible another expansion of the college football playoff?
Yeah, I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as Rab and Wilson, but I will say I think it was a lot already this past season with how many teams were already in it. So I'm kind of against it getting even bigger.
Like we have been on this planet a lot less than some traditional people, especially you as the youngest guy here. But like it's just too fast. I feel like the old guy yelling at the cloud, but like slow down and let us enjoy the first change before we decide to change it again. So speaking of changes, the LSU men have actually won a couple of games after a 1-10 start in the SEC that was just as dreary as can be. Like you're closer to it than I am, TJ, but like I felt like, especially because the non-conference season was promising from LSU, it was especially disappointing to see them just fall flat on their face in SEC play. And we've talked about the reasons for that, the injuries and how difficult the conference is. But it may not mean anything long-term, but to see them get the 2 wins, they beat Oklahoma on the road, got their first SEC road win on Saturday, then followed that up Tuesday night with a win over South Carolina. They're now 3-10. It just looks a hell of a lot better than 1-10.
Yeah, there was a very dark potential reality where LSU didn't win another game after winning just one. And obviously, Oklahoma and South Carolina aren't teams in the SEC to brag home about, but they're still talented. Both those teams that have first-round draft pick talents, and Jeremiah Fears at Oklahoma and Colin Murray Boyles at South Carolina. So there was a dark potential future where LSU just dropped those games, and then they play Florida, number 2 team in the country, on Saturday, and they play Tennessee and Mississippi State and Kentucky, and then all of a sudden they have 1-17. But no, that's not the reality we're in. 3 wins is not awesome, but it's better than 1. And the energy is back. Not that they're super hyper and excited that they have 3 wins now, but it feels good not to have crushing losses like they did against Ole Miss, not getting I guess blown out in games like they did against Georgia and Texas, and to feel like, okay, we're not a horrible team. We made some adjustments and we're not depressed anymore. I can't tell you how sad it was in the post game press conference after the Ole Miss heartbreaker at home, where the game winning putback, Cam Carter, who's a really energetic player, even at the loss, he's not super down. He was really sad. Like he was not, didn't sound like he gave up, but just sounded just very down. The biggest down he probably had since he got back home to Louisiana at a transfer from Kansas State. So yeah, the vibes are back, and I think they feel pretty good. And Florida's not, we'll get to it, but Florida's not a slouch at all. But they feel really good about how they've been playing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'm glad you mentioned how difficult the closing schedule is, because we'll talk about that. But first off, that Oklahoma game, as painful as the Ole Miss game was, where you blow an 11-point lead in the final 3 minutes, this was a game that Oklahoma thought they had in hand. I mean, they had like a 7-point lead with a minute left. They were still up by, I think, 5 with 15, 20 seconds left. LSU able to hit a couple of threes, make a couple of steals, and actually ended up winning by 3. They went on like an 8-0 run in the final 20 seconds of the game and really just stunned the Sooners. What were the keys to these wins? What is LSU doing better? And again, part of it is you're not playing the top 5 teams in the country that you are playing sometimes in the SEC. That helps. But what have they been doing better?
Yeah, no, they've been one thing I have to give credit to Matt McMahon with this team having the issues that it's had. He's not just not doing anything differently. And the big thing that he's done differently in the last 2 wins is play a smaller lineup from the jump, not just subbing in a 4th guard at some point in the first half. So against Oklahoma, they started Victorious Miller instead of Corey Chess. That was sort of by necessity because Corey Chess was feeling some back spasms pregame. It was a late scratch from that game. So instead of their 2 forward starting lineup, they had 4 guards and Damian Collins holding down the paint. And that's a trade-off sort of situation where you get better shooting and offensive skill. You trade off of rebounds and maybe some defense because Corey Chess is a freak athlete. And it worked. It did take some incredible human heroics that Cam Carter put together in order to score 7 of the 8 in the last 20 seconds. That was unreal, just individual showing by the senior. But they stayed in the game because they had a spaced out court. They had 4 guards around Damian Collins, who had his career high 22 points, along with 4 blocks against Oklahoma. And Collins also, not to be outdone too much, he had popped his shoulder, his right shoulder, again, second time this year. No, I did believe the 3rd time this season. The other time was also not as damaging, but he popped it out, came back 2 minutes later, and scored another layup before fouling out. But Damian Collins was a big piece, and he's able to do better because he has more space in the paint with a 4th guard surrounding the 3-point line and just more skill level, just being able to pass the ball to him on the pick and roll. So yeah, the 4 guard lineup has been super beneficial for spacing, for shooting. These guys are actually making shots now. This is the type of 3-point shooting that Matt McMahon was sort of hoping for from the beginning of SEC play, and that extra additional just boosted their offense. And their defense hasn't fallen off a cliff at all. They're actually more connected. And I think Curtis Givens, as well as Victorious Miller, the freshman guards, they've stepped up in their defensive performance, and that sort of combination has helped them be able to not just stick in these games but pull out W's.
Yeah. No, it's been a different team, I think, and that's even going back, a week or 2 before the 2 wins, because we talked about the Ole Miss game where they really outplayed Ole Miss for most of the game at Arkansas, which they ended up losing by 12, but that was a competitive game for 30 minutes, which I'm not sure, and again, they beat Arkansas earlier in the season. But point is LSU has put together some good basketball here. The interesting thing, TJ, you talked about the rest of the schedule. LSU's got 5 games left. 3 are home games against top 5 teams, or top 10 teams, excuse me, because Texas A&M is number 7. But you've got number 2 Florida, number 6 Tennessee, number 7 Texas A&M at the PMAC. The 2 road games are against only top 25 teams. At number 21 Mississippi State, who by the way is going to be moving up after they beat Texas A&M, and at number 17 Kentucky. So there aren't a lot of games left on the schedule where you go LSU's got a great chance. But the interesting thing here is if they can manage to win one more game, the possibility exists that despite how dreary this season is, it could end in the NIT, TJ. Like there are new procedures for selecting NIT teams this year. This is the first year of this. And one of them is that the top 2 SEC teams and ACC teams who don't go to the NCAA tournament, the top 2 teams not getting at-large bids to the NCAA tournament automatically get NIT bids. Okay, so part of this depends on how many teams the SEC gets into the tournament. LSU is currently tied for 14th place with Oklahoma, but they have the tiebreaker over Oklahoma. A lot of bracketologists say the SEC is going to get 11. Some say 12. If the season ended today and the SEC got 12 teams in, which the last one of those I believe would be Georgia or Arkansas, take your pick on that, then the other one of those who doesn't get in, Georgia or Arkansas, and LSU, because they have that tiebreaker over Oklahoma in the standings, would get an NIT bid. So it's kind of crazy. And again, if you don't win another game, that's probably not happening. You figure Oklahoma's going to win at least one more game. But the fact that we're even talking about this is actually kind of shocking.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thanks for running down the scenario there. And it's not out of the realm possibility. Like, that can actually happen if they sneak in and let's say beat Tennessee at home. And Tennessee's not a bad team at all, great team, really good defensive team, but they have their offensive droughts. And if LSU is playing offense like they have been the last couple of games, then you never know, an upset could be brewing. Yeah, so LSU, it's incredible. Like you can have serious doubts about a team when they're going through ruts like LSU did, and obviously like the rut they had sort of tanked a lot of their chances to make the NCAA tournament. Not impossible. That's even more longest shots if they win so many games the close of the year. But they still were managed to salvage get these wins to salvage the ending of their season and go into the postseason with an NIT. But like you said, and who knows, they can have like a bit of rhythm where they can have a good showing and not just get 1 or 2 wins, but who knows how far they can go in the NIT and however like the bracket is made and who they're paired up with. So yeah, I think right now if you ask Matt McMahon, he's just focused on one game at a time. He's not thinking about the NIT. He's not thinking about sort of like even the NCAA tournament and bubble watch and all those sort of things. But I think he's just happy that he's found a winning recipe, which has been the 4 guards and even guys that haven't been good players so far this season, such as Mike Williams. He had 13 points, which was a season high, which doesn't sound great, but Mike Williams had 9 DNPs this year and was in and out the rotation, had big, like really troubling turnovers and defensive lapses here and there. And now he's someone that has showed some sparks of life, along with having Victorious Miller showing some sparks of life. He had 12 points and 4 assists. So yeah, you never know. And hey, I know Florida is an incredibly tough contest. I'm not gonna bet that they'll win it, but I think LSU they might have some juice, and if the PMAC is loud, you just never know what could happen.
Yeah, Florida's playing as well as anybody in the country right now, so that's going to be a tough one. But again, if we're just talking about this NIT thing, you don't have to win them all. You just need to win 1, maybe 2 more to try to get into that situation. And as far as the NCAA tournament goes, ESPN's Bubble Watch, I was a little surprised LSU popped back up on it this week. They gave them 1% odds of making the NCAA tournament, 1 out of 100. So you're telling me there's a chance, Lloyd.
Yeah.
And look, I don't know. They're not going to win all 5 of these games against these top 10 and top 20 teams. But if they were to somehow, TJ, go 4-1, then you're 7-11 in the conference. You go
that might be good enough.
Yeah, you go to Nashville, I think at least with a chance to say, hey, we pick off another game or 2, we're going to get ourselves in that conversation. So,
yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You have the tough competition, which is unlikely for you to win. But if you beat that tough competition, those are quad 1 wins that look really good, make your resume look from below average to, now, okay, they got hot at the right time. I think there may be some legitimacy. Again, this is longest of long odds. I'm not betting on it. I'm not predicting it, but I'm sure that's if they have it there where they're going to hope that they win as many games as possible. And who knows, have a miraculous sort of thing. But the NIT is a more realistic goal. And yeah, I think that this team plays the way they have, and they have this sort of offensive, I guess, boom in a way. This team made 13 threes. They haven't made 13 threes since December, if that. So if they are able to keep that kind of play going, hey, there's some crazy things that could happen.
Yeah, no question about it. And Matt McMahon can take it one game at a time, but we'll look ahead for him to the NIT, baby. We'll do it. TJ, before we end the show here, any thoughts on the SEC at large? Anything that's stood out to you, surprised you, or just thoughts since we last spoke?
Yeah, Missouri. Oh my goodness, they just beat Alabama yesterday, and I just finished watching that game from start to finish this morning. Missouri did not think they would be this good from
Crazy.
back when LSU played them. To the pretty much, even though the score got closer against Alabama towards the end, they were beating them handily, and they are really aggressive, really fiery. They might rise up from. I think they're currently number 15. They might rise up into the top 10, maybe 12 at the lowest, I think. So that's a big deal. Mississippi State, that was a big win over A&M recently, and they might be better than A&M. Yeah, Auburn's Auburn. Auburn, they had a little scare against Arkansas, and Janai Broom is that guy. So yeah, no, the SEC is rolling, and yeah, we'll see if they're. I know there's talk about if 4 SEC teams can be number 1 seeds. I don't think that'll happen. I think Duke will definitely, unless they fumble a loss here at the end. But yeah, the SEC's dominance, yeah, it's start to finish, has been really impressive.
Yeah, you don't think you'd ever see one conference get 4 number 1 seeds. If it weren't for such a great season and such a great team Duke had this year, you could actually see it this year. I don't think it'll happen because of Duke, but super interesting. So, all right, he is Toyloy, better known as TJ Brown. He is the LSU men's basketball beat writer for The Advocate, and appreciate you joining us. Everybody subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are back pretty much twice a week. Like Mardi Gras week might only come on once, but we'll be pretty much twice a week through the rest of the school year. And we appreciate you joining us. We'll be back next week to talk more basketball, women's basketball, gymnastics. Who knows what we'll talk? Maybe some more off-season football talk. And we will continue to keep it rolling. So we appreciate you joining us. My thanks to Wilson Alexander and Scott Rabalais for stopping by, and to TJ Brown. And we will see you next time on the LSU Sports Insider.